Welcome to The SIP, the Solstice Innovations podcast. In each episode, we chat with industry experts and innovators in insurance and insurtech. Join us for insights on trends, technologies, and the stories driving our industry forward. Let's sip on knowledge together at The SIP. Hi, this is John Umstead for Solstice Innovations. On this two-part episode of The SIP, our guest is Gregg Porter, who is the National Flood Sales Director with Bankers Insurance. Welcome to The SIP, everyone. We've got our guest Gregg Porter with us today, and we're going to be talking about storm season preparedness and kind of looking at things beyond just a typical checklist. So welcome back to the show, Gregg.
Great being here, John. Thank you. I really enjoyed the first time, and I know this one will even be better if that's a thing. more education and more awareness for your listeners out there. So I'm excited, and thank you so much for being for this opportunity for me to be here today.
Yeah, thanks for coming back on. Appreciate it. Before we get into some of the discussion, why don't we just have you do a quick introduction of yourself, your role, the company you're with, and that sort of thing. Give a little bit of your background.
Absolutely. So Gregg Porter, National Flood Sales Director for Bankers Insurance Group out of St. Petersburg, Florida. I've been with the company 2 years in September. I've been doing flood insurance since 2013, so 13 years in the flood space. And I've been in the P&C industry for insurance since 2006. So 20th anniversary. Time flies.
Time flies. Happy anniversary.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I love the industry. I was able to do private passenger auto when I first started. Dabbled a little bit in commercial vehicle as well, and led me to flood insurance, and here I am ever since 2013. So I love what I do, and definitely promoting a educational awareness for your viewers out there, and hoping they can learn a few things.
All right. Well, let's get into that then. So let's start off with the first question, Gregg. So, every year we hear a lot of the same kind of preparedness advice, make sure you've got water, batteries, generators, food, all of those sorts of things. But from an insurance perspective, what are the preparedness steps that homeowners might overlook?
Preparedness steps has definitely evolved the last 20, 30 years. I grew up in Louisiana, and we used to be able to track hurricanes on a chart with a pencil. And you would kind of see that cone of uncertainty. And I remember my mom and dad, the checklist was on the refrigerator. It was written back then. Maybe it's still on pen and paper. Nowadays we have phones and everything, but they would have on the refrigerator, kind of glancing, around as a kid, like, where's this list? And it always batteries, flashlight, perishable, non-perishable goods, of course, your peanut butter, bread, things like that. Never overlook that. Always be prepared. Obviously, the times have changed, of course, but you might not have to be glued to your phone or the TV, but make sure, hurricane season does start, June 1st. Here we are. But even the inland threat, a lot of times, Louisiana, with the first storm of the season last week, doesn't have to be this catastrophic storm. I mean, it could just be a low pressure system, a tropical depression. Have a plan, regardless if it's a Category 5 and you need to evacuate, or if it's just a stubborn low pressure system in the Gulf or the Atlantic or the Pacific, wherever you may be, and just have a plan. A lot of times too, by the way, is having information for your independent insurance agent, or maybe your State Farm, your Allstate, whoever you have your insurance with. It's vital to have that information handy and just be prepared and know how deductibles may apply if it's a named storm. The checklist, of course, make sure you have everything. You don't want to go to you've seen these videos that go viral at Costco, lines and lines of, boarding up your home, gas. Just be a step ahead. That's all you can really do, is just be prepared.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that is kind of being aware of your surroundings, right? And having that sort of plan in place, even if you have good weather going on. And I give you a really simple example of this, Gregg. A couple of years ago, my wife and I were staying outside of Asheville, North Carolina, and we were kind of up in the hills a little bit in an Airbnb, just kind of hanging out for a long weekend. And a year later, that very area was what was hit, right? And as long as I've been in the insurance world, I just never would have thought about it. Where we were,
Yeah.
was ground zero, and I just never would have crossed my mind.
I know. You think of elevation. I think Asheville is roughly at 2,000 feet, and some of the mountains, are on the Blue Ridge Parkway are 4,000, 5,000 feet in elevation. You're like, no, I mean this is not going to happen here, especially a storm system that came. It definitely wreaked havoc, of course, in the Tampa St. Pete area. And then look where it ended up. So you just never know with weather. And I think there was a system a few years ago too that actually came back through the Atlantic and did another loop. So it wasn't even finished. So Mother Nature can be ferocious. So as you said, John,
Yeah.
sometimes it's the places where you least expect. In an Airbnb, and just look what happened a year later. So that's a great, it's a great cautionary tale.
Yeah, yeah, and in where we were, there was one road in, one road out, and if that road was gone, even if nothing had happened where we were staying, we're
Yep.
stranded, right? So,
Yeah. Absolutely.
all right, Greg. So, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that people might still have about storm-related insurance coverage?
Absolutely. Number one is just being stubborn. I can't tell you how many times I've lived in Texas, Louisiana. I've talked to so many agents and insureds, friends of mine that I went to high school with, and it's just that stubborn mentality. It'll never happen to me. That's number one. Number two, I would say, not to pick on lenders and realtors, it has gotten better, but I can't tell you, John, how many times you see a Zillow listing or even the old fashioned newspaper on Sunday that has an open house from 2 to 5, not in a flood zone. That cannot, no, 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 no. Perhaps you could, has not flooded before, or flood coverage may be for zones B, C, and X, just however you want to word it, but for them to, and again, it has gotten better, but that was one of my pet peeves is to say not NOT, not in a flood zone, because everybody is in a flood zone. The difference, of course, is your degree of risk. There's an AE, there's an A, or there's a V. Your 100-year floodplain, what FEMA defines it as, and then there's your your 500 year. So we can get into this later. Just because you have a B, C, or an X, it is optional. And I really wish a lot of people would just say, take that word optional out and go ahead when you're purchasing a home, get that flood policy. But I've been said many times, I've been told, Greg, we were given the option. And guess what they do when you're given the option? More than likely they're not going to purchase it. And it's unfortunate. Yes, things have gotten more expensive. I realize, of course, since 2020, a lot of inflationary pressures and things out there with groceries and gasoline. I understand, families on a budget, but if there's a way you can find out, even if it's reduced coverage, you might not have to carry the 250, 100,000, or maybe just carry dwelling and not carry contents. Just find a way. Peace of mind is going to outweigh the risks. And it's always going to be better in the end whenever you do have a flood policy and not relying on a loan.
Yeah, yeah, and like you said, everyone is at risk. It's just varying
Yeah,
degrees. It's also varying types of
yeah,
floods that could occur. So,
yeah, yeah,
so we talk a lot about coverage gaps and misunderstandings. So homeowners often assume that they're covered for various perils until they have a claim, and then they find out they're not. So what are some of those gaps? What coverage gaps, I should say, tend to surprise the policyholders after a major storm?
The big one, I was living in Louisiana, was the 2016 flood. And this was in August. It was not a hurricane. It was just a low pressure system that dumped, I think, 30 to 40 inches of rain in less than 48 hours. Baton Rouge area, Lafayette, Youngsville, Broussard, some of the neighboring parishes in Baton Rouge. And this one was personal. We were okay, but a few miles down from us, we had so many friends and family members that had 2, 3, 4 feet of water in their homes. What stuck out to me, John, till this day, and it's hard actually, now looking, 10 years ago in 2016. So here we are 10 years later. The amount of people, including some family members of mine, that had a flood policy, which is great. That's what we preach about. But guess what they did not have? They didn't have contents. Contents can be added for as little as $60 to $80 a year on a flood policy. One agent put it to me like this 20 years ago. Basically, if you took a house in the palm of your hand and you turned it upside down, everything that falls out would be contents coverage in a flood policy. So while their home, their dwelling was covered, which is great. So, but then again, there was a big surprise when those water levels receded, and they were met with an, oh, wait a minute, I talked to my agent, I read my flood policy, we had coverage. But guess what? May have been overlooked. And there's a lot I saw. There were even news specials that were sort of these exposés where, it became a very heated, no, that's not what they told me. And yes, that's, lawsuits, as you can imagine. So just and again, it's gotten better. Make sure if you don't, you can reject it. I tell independent agents, of clients, everybody, sign a form. If you don't want it, okay. But make sure you're covering yourself as an agent, as a rejection form. It's very important. That's a big gap, I would say, because flood, again, you may think you have it, which you do. And by the way, the ones that did have it, they were not aware. It is two separate deductibles. Sometimes you might think of it as a blanket coverage for a flood policy. Coverage is going to be, I'm sorry, the deductibles for contents is going to be different than the deductible, dwelling and contents have two separate deductibles. So just something to think about that's sometimes overlooked when it comes to coverages.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And a lot of those things, the memories, the photos, some of that stuff, the family heirlooms, irreplaceable. But so many of the material items are,
Oh
and
yeah.
it just makes sense to make sure that you're covered that way.
Absolutely. Because again, I think I'm a firm believer, and even if I wasn't in the insurance industry, just the peace of mind. The life is stressful as is, right? Maybe you have younger kids, maybe just a different, you own your own business. There's always something out there. Why make insurance, why complicate it by gambling? I look at it that way. If you're not going to have insurance, you're really gambling. And sometimes you win, but I feel that in the insurance, there's not you're not going to win. And it's always a safe bet is to have a policy.
Yeah. Yeah, so Greg, we often we talk about what we can do after a storm. Of course, before the storm, we talk about getting insurance, making sure that you are covered. But what can homeowners do before a storm season begins, before the season begins, that can really have great impact on the claims outcomes and recovery
Yeah.
times should they occur?
I'm hoping everyone, and this is speaking very broadly, that if you do go to an independent agent or you've had the same State Farm, Nationwide, Allstate, whoever you go through, make sure there's a personal relationship with your agent as far as not just being a salesperson, because that's what sometimes they're viewed as. Oh, well, he sold me or she sold me. Use them and try to figure out and maybe switch. If they're not that consultant, have a meeting. Quarterly might be too much. Maybe it's depending if they're a big agency with a lot of volume, they may be too busy for that. But at least, like you said, John, before the hurricane season, maybe like in January, first quarter of the year, have an annual meeting. People do this all the time with their Fidelity or Vanguard, their 401k, their IRAs, their financial planners. Do the same with your insurance agent. Make that person, hey, I'd like for you to be, you're a great salesperson. You sold me on that. We bought a boat insurance policy, flood. We have it all, umbrella, you name the coverage, but let's have a meeting. And it could be a 15-minute meeting, maybe an hour, depending on, and review everything, really review everything and see what is a name. A lot of people out there, they're a school teacher. They might be a police officer, a firefighter, an attorney. They're not in the industry. Everybody from a different walk of life may not even know what a name storm, a 2%, 5% excluding wind, all the deductibles, this insurance jargon, the verbiage that we use day in and day out. I think it's very helpful for them to sit down with that person, or maybe like we're doing, maybe through a Zoom, however you can communicate with the agent and make sure that everybody's in line. Because you worry about your 401k. You're going to do it at 65. And how am I going to, my 529 fund for my child that's going to college? I want to make sure. Why not do the same with your insurance? People, it is overlooked. Well, I never thought about that, Greg. A lot of, I buy the policy. I have to carry auto. I keep it in my glove box or my ID card on my phone and set it and forget it. I think
Yeah.
we need to get away from that mentality. And a lot more agents are starting to become more, of course, they're going to be salespeople, but they're becoming more that consultant that is actually cross-selling, if you will. And I've even seen some financial planners also when I visit agencies that also have, they kind of do it together like a duo, insurance and financial planning. So I think that's very important and have a plan, of course, always be prepared.
Yeah, and I think that consultant view of the agent is as important for the policyholder as it is for the agent to offer it, because we get online, right? We look stuff up. We use AI. We do whatever we do to it seems like to avoid
Yeah,
some of that personal
yeah.
contact, right? And it's still really important, especially when you're talking about protecting your greatest assets. You don't want to just rely on the things that you can look up. You want to hear from that
Avoiding
expert.
contact. I'm glad you brought that up. I have a nephew. This was about 7 years ago. He's in his mid 20s now, but he was 18, 19 years old that just graduated high school, and parents, my brother and sister-in-law bought him a nice Jeep, and I gave him three recommendations for insurance of independent agents in his area. He looked at me like I was crazy. He said, "No, Uncle Greg, I'm just why can't I just go on my phone and go to it?" And I said, "You know what? You can, but I had to put myself in his, in that younger. We always say the younger generation, but regardless of your generation, just like you said, that ease of use, that sort of eliminating everything is driven online now, which I get both sides of it, but I do feel like a handshake and if a sit down just to get to know somebody, that human element, I think will never go away, and I think it's going to always be valuable, even in this high tech society and with the way things are going. So
Yeah, convenience is great, but you still can't beat human interaction. So.
yeah.